Fighter jets scramble to intercept an unknown aircraft heading straight for the USS Lincoln carrier. 2 F-22s close in, weapons locked. 30 seconds to fire. Then a voice cuts through the radio, calm, commanding, impossible. Everything stops. The pilots freeze. The admiral goes pale. The entire ship falls silent. Who is she? Why does one voice change everything? Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The morning sun painted the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and orange. High above the water, a small aircraft moved steadily toward the USS Lincoln, one of the most powerful aircraft carriers in the American Navy. The plane was an L-39 Albatross, a simple training jet that looked harmless compared to the massive warship ahead. But something was wrong. The aircraft had no identification signal. Its radio was silent. And it was flying straight into restricted military airspace. On the carrier's bridge, radar operators watched the unknown aircraft with growing concern. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Warning lights flashed on multiple screens, and the steady beep of the radar seemed to grow louder with each passing second. Captain James Mitchell stood behind them, his jaw tight with tension. He had been commanding the USS Lincoln for 2 years, and in all that time, he had never faced a situation quite like this. Unknown aircraft usually turned away after the first warning. They certainly didn't fly straight toward one of America's most valuable military assets. "Sir, the aircraft is now 15 miles out and closing," the radar operator called out, his voice steady despite the stress. Still no transponder signal. Still no radio response. Captain Mitchell felt his stomach tighten. Every instinct told him this was wrong. Either someone was incredibly lost and incredibly stupid, or this was a deliberate intrusion. Neither option was good. "Unknown aircraft, this is USS Lincoln," the radio operator called out, speaking slowly and clearly. "You are entering restricted airspace. Identify yourself immediately or we will be forced to take action." Silence. Just the hiss of static on the radio. The operator tried again, his voice more urgent now. "Unknown aircraft, this is your final warning. Identify yourself now. You are approaching a United States Navy vessel. Turn away immediately." Still nothing. Captain Mitchell made his decision quickly. "Scramble the alert fighters. 2 F-22s. Full weapons load. And get Admiral Hayes up here now." Within minutes, 2 F-22 Raptor fighters roared off the carrier deck. These were the most advanced fighter jets in the world, loaded with missiles and ready for anything. The sound of their engines was like controlled thunder, shaking the entire ship as they launched into the bright morning sky. The lead pilot was Lieutenant Jake Morrison, callsign Hawk 1. His wingman was Lieutenant Sarah Chen, callsign Hawk 2. Both were among the best pilots on the carrier, selected for the quick reaction force precisely because they could handle high-pressure situations. Jake's heart was pounding as he climbed rapidly. This was real. This wasn't a training exercise. Somewhere ahead was an aircraft that might be hostile, and he might have to make a life-or-death decision in the next few minutes. Jake checked his radar screen. The target was there, a small blip moving at a steady speed. Too slow for a military jet. Too deliberate for a lost civilian. The course was aerostraight, showing no deviation, no uncertainty. "Hawk 2, you see what I'm seeing?" Jake asked over the radio. "Copy that, Hawk 1, Sarah replied. "Light jet, probably an L-39. Flying a straight course. No evasive action. Either they're incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. Either they don't know we're here, or they don't care," Jake said, feeling a chill run down his spine. The 2 F-22s closed in fast, their powerful engines eating up the distance. Within moments, they were flanking the small aircraft, one on each side. Jake looked over and saw the L-39 clearly now. It was painted civilian colors, white with blue trim, but something about the way it flew seemed professional. The aircraft held its position perfectly, not wavering even slightly despite the turbulence from the larger jets. Unknown aircraft, Jake transmitted on the emergency frequency, his voice firm and commanding. This is U.S. Navy F-22, callsign Hawk 1. You are in violation of restricted airspace. You have 60 seconds to turn away or we will open fire. This is not a drill. The L-39 continued on its course, steady as a rock. The pilot didn't even twitch the wings in acknowledgement. Jake felt a cold sweat on his forehead. He had never fired on a civilian aircraft before. He had trained for it, practiced in simulators, but the reality was different. There was a human being in that cockpit. Someone's daughter, someone's mother, someone's friend. And he might have to kill them in the next minute. 30 seconds, he called out, his voice tight. Unknown aircraft, turn away now. This is your final warning. On the carrier, Captain Mitchell stood in the Combat Information Center, surrounded by screens and operators. The massive room hummed with electronic equipment and tense voices. Admiral Robert Hayes was beside him, watching the situation unfold on the main tactical display. Sir, should we authorize weapons free? An officer asked nervously. Admiral Hayes hesitated. Something felt off about this whole situation. The aircraft was too calm, too precise. A lost civilian would be panicking by now, making erratic turns, desperately trying to contact someone. A hostile aircraft would be taking evasive action or preparing to attack. This aircraft was doing neither. It was simply flying straight and level, as if it had every right to be there. Hawk 1, this is Lincoln Actual, the Admiral spoke into the radio, his voice controlled but concerned. Stand by for orders. Do not fire unless I give explicit authorization. Do you copy? Copy that, Lincoln Actual, Jake responded. But we're at 15 seconds. The tension in the Combat Information Center was unbearable. 50 people held their breath, watching screens, waiting for something to happen. In all their training, all their preparations, none of them had faced a situation quite like this. Inside the L-39, Captain Rachel Storm Morrison sat calmly in the cockpit. She was 42 years old, with short gray hair and sharp blue eyes that had seen more combat than most pilots would ever experience. Her hands rested steadily on the controls, showing no sign of fear or hesitation despite the two deadly fighters flanking her. Rachel had been flying for 25 years. She had flown combat missions in 3 different countries, most of them so classified that they didn't officially exist. She had trained hundreds of pilots, including some of the very best in the Navy. She had written tactical manuals, designed training programs, and pushed the limits of what was possible in military aviation. And 5 years ago, she had disappeared from active duty under mysterious circumstances that no one was allowed to discuss. Now she was back, and she had a mission. She watched the 2 F-22s keeping pace with her, one on each side. She could see the pilots' helmets, could imagine their stress levels rising with each passing second. She knew exactly what they were going through because she had been in their position many times before. She had been the one in the fighter jet, facing an unknown aircraft, finger hovering over the trigger, wondering if today would be the day she had to take a life. She also knew exactly what would happen next. She had planned this moment down to the second. Rachel reached for her radio switch. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, flipping the correct switches in the correct order. She took a slow breath, centering herself. It was time. USS Lincoln, she said, her voice calm and clear, cutting through the static like a knife. This is Shadow Storm. Authorization code, Sierra Echo 7 Alpha 9er. Stand down all weapons. I'm coming home. The effect was immediate and electric. On the carrier, every person in the Combat Information Center froze. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. Even the constant background hum of electronic equipment seemed to fade away, leaving only shocked silence. Admiral Hayes grabbed the radio handset so hard his knuckles turned white. His face had gone pale. He had heard that call sign before, years ago, in briefings so classified he couldn't even acknowledge they existed. "Say again," he demanded, his voice shaking slightly. "Repeat your call sign." "Shadow Storm," Rachel repeated, her voice still perfectly calm. "Authorization Sierra Echo 7 Alpha Niner. Request immediate landing clearance, Admiral Hayes." The Admiral's hands were shaking as he set down the radio. He turned to his aide. "Get me the red folder. Now. The one in the classified safe." The aide ran, returning 30 seconds later with a red folder stamped with so many classification markings it was barely readable. Admiral Hayes opened it with trembling hands and found the list of authorization codes. His finger ran down the page until he found it, Sierra Echo 7 Alpha Niner. Code name, Shadow Storm. Real name, Captain Rachel Morrison. Status, active, highest priority. Authority level, presidential. Special note, if this officer ever uses this code, comply immediately with all requests. Ask no questions. File no reports. This authorization supersedes all other orders. The Admiral took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. In 30 years of Navy service, he had never seen an authorization like this. "All stations, this is Admiral Hayes," he announced, his voice carrying through the Combat Information Center. "Stand down all weapons immediately. I repeat, stand down all weapons. Hawk Flight, you are ordered to form an honor escort. Bring that aircraft in with full ceremony." In his F-22, Jake Morrison felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Shadow Storm. He knew that call sign. Every pilot in the Navy knew that call sign, even though most of them thought it was just a legend, a story told in bars and ready rooms to entertain new pilots. Did she just say Shadow Storm? Sarah's voice came over the radio, filled with disbelief. Jake couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Sir, did you say honor escort?" "That's an order, Lieutenant," the Admiral said firmly. "And when you land, you will not discuss this with anyone. Is that absolutely clear?" "Crystal clear, sir," Jake replied, his mind racing. He switched to his wingman's frequency. "Sarah, you heard the man. Form up for escort." "Copy that," Sarah said, her voice stunned. "But Jake, is this really happening? Is that really her?" "I guess we're about to find out," Jake said, still trying to process what was happening. The two F-22s smoothly changed position, moving from attack formation to a ceremonial escort. They flew perfectly spaced on either side of the L-39, like an honor guard escorting royalty. It was a complete transformation. 30 seconds ago they were prepared to shoot this aircraft down. Now they were protecting it. On the carrier, word spread like wildfire. Shadow Storm was back. Sailors abandoned their posts to crowd onto the flight deck. Officers whispered in corners, pulling out old photos, checking archived records. Everyone wanted to see if the legend was true. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Williams stood on the deck with his arms crossed. He was 50 years old and had been in the Navy for 30 years. He had heard the stories about Shadow Storm, but he had never believed them. They seemed too impossible, too perfect. The kind of stories people told to make boring deployments more interesting. "Chief, is it true?" a young sailor asked him, eyes wide with excitement. "Is Shadow Storm really landing here?" Marcus stared at the approaching aircraft, flanked by the two F-22s. "If it is true," he said slowly, "then you're about to see history, son. Shadow Storm was the best pilot who ever lived. She did things in an airplane that the laws of physics say are impossible." "Like what?" the sailor asked eagerly. "Like the time she brought home an F-18 with no hydraulics, no flaps, and one engine on fire," Marcus said, the memory coming back clearly. She landed that bird on this very deck with just manual controls and pure skill. The engineers said it couldn't be done. The manuals said it was impossible. She did it anyway. Why did she leave? Another sailor asked. Marcus shook his head. Nobody knows for sure. One day she was here, the next day she was gone. Some say she got injured badly and couldn't fly anymore. Some say she went on secret missions so classified they don't officially exist. Some say she died and the whole thing is just a ghost story to inspire young pilots. Well, we're about to find out if ghosts can fly, the first sailor said, watching the approaching aircraft. The L-39 approached the carrier with perfect precision. Rachel lined up with the landing area, adjusted her speed with minute throttle movements, and brought the aircraft down with barely a bump. The landing gear touched the deck exactly where it should. The tail hook caught the arresting wire smoothly, bringing the aircraft to a perfect stop. It was a textbook perfect landing, the kind that flight instructors show as examples of how it should be done. The canopy opened and Rachel Morrison climbed out. She was smaller than people expected, barely 5'6". She moved with a slight limp, favoring her left leg, and one of her hands showed the scarring of old burns. But her eyes were sharp and alert, taking in everything around her with the careful attention of someone who had survived by noticing details others missed. Captain Mitchell was the first to reach her. He saluted smartly, his movements precise. "Captain Morrison, welcome aboard the USS Lincoln." Rachel returned the salute, her movements just as precise despite the obvious discomfort in her leg. "Thank you, Captain. It's good to be back on a carrier deck. It's been too long." "The Admiral wants to see you immediately," Mitchell said. "But first, there are a lot of people here who want to meet you." Rachel looked around at the crowded deck. Hundreds of sailors were watching her, some with disbelief on their faces, some with awe, some with simple curiosity. She could feel the weight of their stares, the expectations, the legends they had heard. "Give me 5 minutes with the Admiral first," Rachel said. "Then I'll talk to whoever wants to talk. I owe them that much." She followed Captain Mitchell through the carrier's corridors. Everywhere they walked, sailors stopped and stared. Some saluted. Some just watched in silence. Word had spread through the entire ship in minutes. Admiral Hayes stood when she entered his office, and immediately offered his hand. His grip was firm but respectful. "Captain Morrison. I never thought I'd see you again. Hell, half the Navy thinks you're dead." "Neither did I, Admiral," Rachel said honestly. "But here I am. Still breathing, still flying." Hayes gestured to a chair. "Sit, please. And tell me what the hell is going on. I got a message 3 days ago saying to expect a classified visitor, but no details. Now you show up unannounced, nearly get shot down by my fighters, and use an authorization code I've never seen before in my entire career." Rachel sat down carefully, wincing slightly as her leg bent. The old injury still bothered her, especially after long flights. "I'm here to evaluate the carrier's readiness, Admiral. Specifically, I need to see if your pilots and crew can handle unexpected situations." "By pretending to be a hostile aircraft?" Hayes asked, his eyebrows raised in disbelief. "By nearly starting an international incident? By making my pilots think they might have to shoot down a civilian? By testing whether your people follow procedures blindly or whether they think for themselves," Rachel said firmly. "You passed, by the way. You didn't shoot me down immediately. You hesitated, asked questions, verified before acting. That's exactly what I needed to see. Too many commanders would have fired first and asked questions later." "Who sent you?" Hayes demanded. "And don't tell me it's classified. I have a presidential-level authorization code sitting on my desk. I think I've earned some answers." Rachel met his eyes steadily. "That's classified above your pay grade, Admiral. What I can tell you is that there are threats coming that we need to be ready for. Threats that don't follow the usual patterns. I'm making sure our best ships and best people can handle the unexpected. And why you? Hayes asked. You disappeared 5 years ago. We were told you were medically discharged after a crash. There was a memorial service. People mourned you. I was medically discharged, Rachel said simply, gesturing to her scarred hand and injured leg. But medical discharge doesn't mean I stopped working. It just means I stopped doing the kind of work that appears in official records. Some of us serve in the light. Some of us serve in the shadows. Black operations, Hayes said quietly, understanding dawning in his eyes. Rachel didn't confirm or deny. She simply looked at him steadily, and that was answer enough. Hayes sighed and leaned back in his chair. All right. What do you need from us? I need to observe your operations for 3 days, Rachel said. I need to see your pilots fly. I need to talk to your crew. I need to understand how this ship really works, not how it works on paper. And at the end, I'll write a report that will go to people whose names you'll never know. And my people? What do I tell them? Tell them the truth, Rachel said. I'm here to evaluate the ship. They should operate normally. If they want to ask me questions, I'll answer what I can. I'm not here to catch people making mistakes. I'm here to see what they do right. They're going to have a lot of questions, Hayes warned. Shadow Storm is a legend in this Navy. Half of them think you're a myth. The other half think you're dead. Now you show up alive, and everyone is going to want to know where you've been and what you've been doing. Rachel smiled slightly, a sad expression that spoke of years of secrets and sacrifices. Then I guess I'll have to prove I'm real. And maybe, just maybe, I can inspire a few of them along the way. An hour later, Rachel stood in the carrier's hangar bay. A crowd of pilots and crew members had gathered, keeping a respectful distance but clearly eager to get closer. The energy in the room was electric, a mixture of excitement, curiosity, and disbelief. Jake Morrison stood near the front, still in his flight suit from the intercept. He couldn't stop staring at her. This was the pilot he had heard about since flight school. The instructor whose training videos were classified so highly that only senior officers could watch them. The tactician who had written half the manual on air combat that every Navy pilot studied. Rachel looked around the group, making eye contact with as many people as she could. I know you all have questions. Ask whatever you want. If I can answer, I will. If I can't, I'll tell you why. A young pilot raised his hand nervously. Ma'am, is it true you once landed an F-18 with no hydraulics? It's true, Rachel said. Though I wouldn't recommend it. The plane was barely controllable. I had no flaps, no speed brakes, and only partial rudder control. But I had 6 Marines on the ground who needed close air support, and I wasn't going to leave them hanging just because my jet was damaged. How did you do it? Another pilot asked, leaning forward eagerly. Rachel thought for a moment, choosing her words carefully. The key is understanding that every aircraft wants to fly. Even a damaged one. You just have to figure out what it can still do and work with that instead of against it. In that case, I used the trim tabs and throttle to control direction, and I came in hot and fast to maintain control authority. I burned through every inch of arresting cable, but it worked. What happened to the Marines? Someone called out. They made it home, Rachel said, her voice softening. That's all that mattered. The jet could be replaced. They couldn't. Jake finally worked up the courage to speak. Ma'am, I was one of the pilots who intercepted you today. I'm sorry we almost shot you down. Rachel turned to look at him directly. What's your name, Lieutenant? Morrison, ma'am. Jake Morrison. No relation, he added quickly. Rachel smiled slightly. Lieutenant Morrison, you did exactly what you should have done. You followed procedures, you gave clear warnings, you communicated with your commander, and you waited for authorization before acting. That's perfect execution. You have absolutely nothing to apologize for. But I didn't recognize your voice, Jake said, frustrated with himself. How could you? Rachel asked gently. You've never heard me before. And that's part of what I'm testing. The question isn't whether you recognize famous voices. The question is whether you follow proper procedures even under extreme stress. You did. Your wingman did. Your carrier did. You all passed with flying colors. She looked around the group again. Let me tell you something important. The stories you've heard about me are probably exaggerated. Yes, I did some unusual things. Yes, I flew some difficult missions. But I'm not superhuman. I'm not some kind of Superman pilot. I'm just a pilot who trained hard, studied harder, and got lucky more times than I deserved. Why did you leave? Someone called out from the back of the crowd. Rachel's expression grew more serious. I got hurt. My body couldn't handle the G-forces anymore. Simple as that. Flying fighters is a young person's game, and I'm not young anymore. But just because I couldn't fly combat missions didn't mean I couldn't serve. So I found other ways to help. Chief Williams pushed through the crowd. Ma'am, I was on the Lincoln 5 years ago when you made that landing with the damaged F-18. I was one of the deck crew. I watched you climb out of that plane, and I saw you were bleeding from your leg. You never mentioned that in any report. Rachel met his eyes. Because the injury wasn't important, Chief. Getting those Marines their air support was important. Getting the plane back so they could learn from what went wrong was important. The rest was just details. You should have been grounded immediately, Williams said firmly. That injury could have killed you if you blacked out. Maybe, Rachel agreed. But those Marines definitely would have died without air support. I made a choice. Sometimes you have to make hard choices. Williams stood at attention and saluted with deep respect. Ma'am, it's an honor to serve on the same deck with you. Rachel returned a salute. The honor is mine, Chief. People like you keep this ship running. Pilots get all the glory, but none of us could do our jobs without the deck crews. Over the next 3 days, Rachel observed everything. She watched pilot training sessions and offered quiet suggestions that transformed good pilots into better ones. She sat in on tactical planning meetings and asked probing questions that made commanders rethink their assumptions. She toured every department of the ship, from engineering to medical to communications, and everywhere she went, she found something to learn and something to teach. Everywhere she went, sailors stopped to watch. Some worked up the courage to introduce themselves and shake her hand. Others just wanted to be able to say they had seen Shadow Storm in person, that the legend was real. On the second day, Jake Morrison found her in the ship's library, reading technical manuals about the newest radar systems. Ma'am, can I ask you something? He said hesitantly. Of course, Lieutenant, Rachel said, looking up from her reading and marking her place. The stories say you flew missions that don't officially exist, Jake said carefully. Into places we weren't supposed to be. Doing things that never made it into any report. Is that true? Rachel was quiet for a moment, considering how much to say. Yes. Were you scared? Jake asked quietly. Every single time, Rachel said honestly. Fear is natural. It keeps you sharp. It keeps you from making stupid mistakes. The trick is not letting it control you, not letting it freeze you up when you need to act. How do you do that? Jake asked earnestly. Training, Rachel said simply. You train until your responses are automatic. You prepare for every possible scenario. You imagine the worst things that could happen and figure out how you'd handle them. And then, when the moment comes, you trust your training and do what needs to be done. What if you fail? Jake asked, voicing his deepest fear. Then you learn from it and do better next time, Rachel said firmly. I've made plenty of mistakes, Lieutenant. I've misjudged situations. I've made bad calls. I've gotten lucky when I should have died. The difference between a good pilot and a great pilot isn't that the great pilot never makes mistakes. It's that the great pilot learns from every mistake and never makes the same one twice. Jake nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Thank you, ma'am. Jake, Rachel said as he turned to leave. You're a good pilot. I watched the full recording of your intercept, not just the moment when I identified myself. Your spacing was perfect, your communication was clear, and your decision-making was sound under extreme pressure. You're going to go far in this Navy. Don't let anyone tell you different. Jake felt his chest swell with pride. Coming from Shadow Storm, that compliment meant everything. On the third day, Rachel conducted her final evaluation. She gathered the senior officers in the briefing room, and the atmosphere was tense. Everyone wondered what she would say, whether they had passed or failed her mysterious test. Gentlemen, ladies, I've completed my assessment, she began, standing at the front of the room. This ship and crew are operating at an exceptional level. Your pilots are well trained, your procedures are sound, and your command structure works efficiently under pressure. Admiral Hayes looked relieved. Thank you, Captain. However, Rachel continued, I did identify some areas for improvement. She pulled up a tactical display on the main screen. During the intercept, there was a 7-second delay between my transmission and your response. In a real emergency, 7 seconds could be the difference between life and death. I recommend implementing faster authentication procedures for high-priority communications. She clicked to the next slide. Second, your radar operators are following their checklists perfectly. Sometimes too perfectly. They're not taking time to think about what they're seeing, to use their judgment and experience. I recommend more scenario training that requires them to make judgment calls, not just follow procedures blindly. For the next hour, Rachel went through her findings. Every observation was precise, detailed, and constructive. It was clear she had studied every aspect of the carrier's operations with an expert eye. When she finished, Admiral Hayes stood. Captain Morrison, this has been the most thorough evaluation I've ever received. Thank you for your service, then and now. You're welcome, Admiral, Rachel said. And thank you for passing my test. The Lincoln and her crew are ready for whatever comes next. When the real crisis comes, you'll be ready. That evening, the ship held a small ceremony on the flight deck as the sun set over the Pacific. Rachel stood beside her L-39, preparing to leave and return to whatever mysterious mission awaited her next. Admiral Hayes presented her with a plaque engraved with the ship's seal. Captain Rachel Morrison, callsign Shadow Storm. In recognition of your continued service to the United States Navy and your dedication to excellence in naval aviation. You may have left active duty, but you never stopped serving. The assembled crew applauded, and the sound echoed across the flight deck. Rachel accepted the plaque with a slight smile, clearly uncomfortable with the attention but grateful for the recognition. Thank you all, she said, her voice carrying across the deck. But remember, I'm not special. I'm not some kind of superhero. I'm just a pilot who loves flying and loves this Navy. Every one of you can achieve what I achieved. You just have to want it badly enough, work hard enough, and never give up even when things get difficult. She climbed into her cockpit and strapped in, going through her pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. The canopy closed with a soft thud. The engine started with a high-pitched whine that gradually built to a roar. Jake Morrison stood at attention as the L-39 taxied to the catapult. Sarah Chin stood beside him, both of them watching the legendary pilot prepare for departure. Do you think we'll ever see her again? Sarah asked softly. I don't know, Jake said. But I'll never forget today. And I'll never forget what she taught us. The L-39 launched off the carrier deck with a burst of speed and acceleration. Rachel banked smoothly and headed toward the horizon, where the sun was painting the sky in brilliant oranges and reds. Within minutes, she was just a small dot against the setting sun, and then she was gone. In the Combat Information Center, a junior officer looked at his radar screen, watching the blip fade into the distance. "Sir, should I log the departure? File the usual paperwork?" Admiral Hayes thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No. Shadow Storm was never here. This whole thing is classified at the highest level." "Understood?" "Yes, sir," the officer said, understanding immediately. "Understood completely." But while the official records would show nothing, while no report would ever be filed, the story of Shadow Storm's return spread through the Navy like wildfire. In ready rooms and mess halls, over coffee, and during late-night maintenance, sailors told each other about the day the legendary pilot came back. Some details were exaggerated with each retelling. Some facts were changed to make the story better. But the core truth remained: Shadow Storm was real. She had tested them, evaluated them, and found them worthy. And that meant everything. 6 months later, Jake Morrison was leading his own training mission when he encountered an unusual situation. An unidentified aircraft appeared on radar, flying an odd pattern that didn't match any standard flight plan. Instead of immediately going to combat stance and preparing to intercept with weapons hot, Jake thought about what Shadow Storm had taught him. He observed carefully, he communicated clearly, he gathered information before acting, and he used his judgment instead of just following the checklist. The aircraft turned out to be a civilian jet with radio problems, lost and looking for help. Jake guided them to safety without any drama, any weapons deployed, or any danger to anyone. After landing, his commanding officer called him into the office. "Lieutenant Morrison, I read your report on today's intercept. You handled an ambiguous situation with excellent judgment and restraint. Where did you learn to think like that?" Jake smiled, remembering that incredible day. "I learned it from the best, sir. I learned it from Shadow Storm." The officer nodded knowingly. He had heard the stories too. "Then she taught you well. That kind of judgment is what separates good pilots from great ones. Carry on, Lieutenant." As Jake left the office, he thought about Rachel Morrison and her unexpected visit. She had shown them all that being a great pilot wasn't just about flying fast or shooting straight or following procedures. It was about thinking clearly under pressure, acting wisely when the situation was unclear, and always keeping the mission and the people first. Somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, in an aircraft with no identification and a destination known only to a handful of people with the highest security clearances, Rachel Morrison smiled as she flew through the twilight. She had tested the Navy's best carrier and found them ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. She had passed on what she knew to a new generation of pilots who would carry on the tradition. Her work was far from over. There would be more missions, more tests, more places where she was needed. But for today, she was content. She had done her job. The F-22s had cut her off over the carrier, their weapons hot and ready. They had prepared to shoot her down, following their training and procedures perfectly. But when they heard her voice on the radio, everything changed in an instant. Because some voices carry weight beyond rank or authority. Some voices are earned through sacrifice, skill, and years of selfless service. Shadow Storm's voice was one of those. And the legend would continue to fly, inspiring new generations of pilots, long after the sun had set on her final landing.